The annual changing of the guard at City Hall launches us into July. Today, we hear from new City Council President Randy White. We're discussing his goals for the term and specifically what happens to important commitments for first responders in Jacksonville and the community benefits agreement that moved into July from last month. Ron Salem wrapped up his year of leadership to City Council. We're going to talk about his achievements and the long-term impact of the new lease with the Jaguar. Plus, his legacy includes an initiative dealing with homelessness and recycling service. And the landmark ruling for the Supreme Court reverberating all week long. Attorney and political analyst Rick Mullaney explains the arguments on both sides on This Week in Jacksonville. Glad you're with us today. Heavy focus on Duval County, and then later, local analysis on that huge national story concerning the Supreme Court. So right now, joining us in studio, Randy White, the newest City Council President in Jacksonville. And President White, your term just began this week. So the big, broad question, what are those top priorities you have in this 12 months?
Well, some of my priorities will be when former Council President Michael Corrigan said, I'm going to finish what we started. There's a few things that President Salem had started, like the DIA committee. I'll continue with that until we get the answers or all the questions answered that we need. And as far as my new committees, I'm doing do a community benefit agreement committee right off. We'll start that. That'll be announced on July the 15th. And the remaining $94 million that we had pulled out from the stadium deal, they will dive deep into that and study that and come to a conclusion and hope we get that out of council on August 27th.
All right, so you've got some things that are out there in front of you. And this CBA, this Community Benefits Agreement, this was part of the big negotiation for the stadium and the new lease, and it's something that City Council said, hey, why don't we set a lot of that aside and then come back to it? So that's what the special committee will be about?
It will be. There was $150 million in that original community benefit agreement, and the $56 million for the city parks, the 5 parks around the stadium, that stayed in the regular agreement. The other $94 million, which will be $30 million for the east side, $50 million countywide, and another, I think, $1 million each for each council district that they could spend in parks. That's the $94 million that the special committee will dive into, see if there needs to be adjustments or additions possibly, and then once they do their work, we'll bring it back to the floor of the council meeting on August 27th, hopefully, and vote it out.
And you still anticipate that the Jaguars are going to come through with their half of that? We're talking about city money at 150. That initial CBA said the Jaguars will put in 150 million over 30 years.
Well, they was going to put in 100 million from the beginning. If the city puts in their 150 million, they will put in the other 50 million, and I believe their 150 million is over 30 years, 5 million a year. So overall, I think the mayor has presented a pretty good package. I think we need to lift up the east side in some fashion, and that's what the committee will dive deep and figure out how we should do it.
So as people get to know you a little bit now, City Council, but you served 32 years with Jacksonville Fire and Rescue Department, retired in 2011, Deputy Director Assistant Fire Chief. Did I get that title right?
That's correct. That's correct.
Also served as President of the Jacksonville Association of Firefighters from 2002 and 3. How do you feel about the tentative agreements that the city has now with both the police union and the fire union?
I'll have to commend Mayor Deegan and her staff and her team. We was lagging way behind in police and fire, and especially corrections. And she's put something on the table. Actually, FOP and the IAFF will be voting next week over a 3-day period to ratify that contract. I feel
that's where all the membership has to say, yes, we agree with what the leadership
has to vote, and I feel confident that will pass.
There were substantial raises in each of these contracts that were offered, in addition to the opportunity to participate in the Florida retirement system, right?
Yes, 6 or 7 years ago when we lost a defined benefit plan with the Police and Fire Pension Fund, all the new hires at Police and Fire from that day forward, had only one option, the 401k. And it's really hurting in recruiting, especially in corrections, over 200 vacancies. I think 107 in the sheriff's office. And it's starting to hamper their recruiting. So given the new hires, when this kicks in, I think in 27, they'll have the option of the 401k or the Florida retirement system, which will be a good recruiting tool.
Well, let's talk before we run out of time here. Let's talk about something that really got started in the last year or two, and that's discussion about the future of the city's jail, Duval County Correctional Facility there. Is this something that you'll be looking at in this term?
Yeah, there again, that's another big lift that President Salem, and I want to commend him for the job he did as president. He formed the committee, and there was 5 subsections, and my part was the actual jail. And dove deep into that, and just bottom line, the jail's wore out. It's undersized, and mainly just past its time. We was able to get a $9 million funds to bring it up to date a little bit, but that don't solve the problem. We definitely, in the next 2 or 3, 4 years, or whenever that plays out, we need to move that jail and build a new one.
And building a new one could be on the scale of $1 billion, is what I understand.
That's what I hear. I don't know. Obviously, there's been no numbers put to that, but it would be a big lift. But that's something we got to have in this city. And the one they have now is just really out of date.
You told me you like to be the guy behind the scenes, making sure things get done. Here you are. Now you're the face of City Council. How do you feel about that for the next 12 months?
Well, it's going to be interesting. I mean, I'm a guy that just likes to get things done, and I really don't mind who gets the credit. That's just the way it's always worked for me. But I can step up and do what I need to do. I've seen a lot over the 32 years on the fire department, so not many things that excite me. So I'll do fine, and we'll just take one day at a time.
Well, that may be the reason your colleagues said, yes, we want you to be the president to make sure that things get done. Council President Randy White, thanks so much for the time today.
Thank you.
All right. So President White's predecessor just finished his term. City Council's Ron Salem. He'll be here next at the table with me. We're going to talk on This Week in Jacksonville.
You're watching This Week in Jacksonville with Kent Justice.
And Dr. Ron Salem is the at-large Group 2 City Councilman in Jacksonville, also the immediate past president of City Council, and joining us now. When we talked about this, said, hey, let's talk about some of the things that you accomplished. Kind of a milestone 12 months. What would you say are the top things that you were able to achieve there in that year leading?
Well, clearly the Jags deal at the end was something that we were shooting for. We had that last meeting on June 25th. We only had about 3 weeks to get that done, and we had marathon meetings. My colleagues cooperated completely. I've got to say, Mary Ann Lamore in Legislative Services set up a calendar that if you fulfill this, you'll be okay. And Mary Stephanopoulos in the Office of General Counsel led us as well. And we got it done.
Yeah, so the 30-year lease coming here obviously has to be ratified or approved by owners for the NFL in October. How do you feel about the terms here? It seems like a lot of people are saying they might be better than expected for an NFL and its home city.
I'll tell you, Kent, when I first read it, went through it, I was generally pleased. I think it's a fair agreement, particularly when you compare it to other cities. The community benefit agreement that you touched on earlier was $100 million originally, which is $10 million more than Buffalo's. And as today, it's now $117 million because of the parks dollars we've already put in the CBA. So it's $27 million more than any other CBA as it stands today.
You talked about it at the beginning of your term. This is going to be a priority. I think we can get it done. Let's see what happens. But once that proposal, once that agreement between the mayor's office and the Jaguars came forward, it seemed like you were pretty committed, not to making sure it was a yes vote, but making sure that you got through the process in that condensed time.
Well, I told my colleagues we will get every question answered, and if we don't, we won't move it forward. But they all showed up for the meetings of the whole, special council meetings, public hearings that we had in order to expedite it, and I think everybody left the process feeling that it's a better agreement due to the amendments the council put on it, and I'm excited that for Jacksonville that we've got the Jaguars here for 30 more years. It's huge for us.
You heard me speak about it with Randy White just a few moments ago, but the idea that the Duval County Jail may need to move, that came up during your term. What is the future of that issue in your mind?
Well, I had lunch with Sheriff Waters yesterday, and he's beginning to look at hiring a consultant, which will begin the process of identifying sites. For number one, reading the agreement that Michael Boylan led that effort for our special committee, and begin moving the process forward. I hope it's a 3 to 5 year process. The jail is worn out. We put in roughly $10 million to bring it up to some standard, and what we need is an infirmary, a full-service infirmary in that jail. We need a mental health wing. We need a campus-style environment versus what we have today, and we need a jail that's a 50-year jail that can grow as our population grows.
So one of the questions with the Jaguars deal happening, hey, city investment and it's going to be big. Well, hey, this is going to be a large price tag once we get there. Is the city of Jacksonville still in a good place to be able to meet some of those financial needs in the future?
Well, President White appointed me the chair of the Finance Committee. So once we receive the budget proposal from the mayor on July 15th, we'll begin the process of reviewing that. And I'll start plugging in some of these commitments we have, police and fire commitments down the road, the CBA, and other commitments that the city has, to see how we look 2, 3, 4 years ahead.
Homelessness diversion program is something that came up. Tell me about how that works and how you feel if there's progress being made because of that.
Well, there were a couple of 2 or 3 major homeless initiatives that we had. One, we set up a special committee that identified a permanent funding source to take care of the homeless, which is huge for our city. We also established a diversion program, which are families that are on the verge of going homeless, and they can contact the Sulzbacher Center and be evaluated, and we can put $1,500 into that family immediately to try to pay a rent, fix a car, whatever it is that's causing them to become homeless.
And try keep them from being at that point.
Absolutely. And number 3, we set up a chronic homeless program where we're taking 25 people that are chronically homeless, identifying them, wrapping around all sorts of services for them, and just to see what it costs us to take someone right off the street and make them a productive citizen. And those 2 programs are actively out there working.
Before we run out of time, I know 2 other things we planned on talking about. Hey, develop the Sports Council, and there's a tourism connection there, and then recycling. How would you characterize those 2 things as victories for you in this last year?
Well, the Sports Council, I think, is huge. We took $1.5 million out of Visit Jacks, out of the Tourist Development Council to Visit Jacks to set up the Sports Council. This entity will recruit sporting events to Jacksonville. They've already applied for 26 NCAA events to bring to Jacksonville over the next 2 or 3 years. You might remember we had the NCAA basketball tournament here in the past, and we lost it. And we need a significant emphasis on sports tourism here in Jacksonville.
Yeah, that can make an impact. 30 seconds or less. Recycling.
So
much discussion about it last year, right?
Well, it was very important to me. We partnered with the Recycling Partnership, spent $1 million in assessing people's recycling bins, and we saw a 23% reduction in waste to our landfill due to that. It was a very successful program, and I hope we can get more people recycling in order to grow that program.
Dr. Ron Salem, thanks so much. City Council President up through the end of June. We'll keep talking with you. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
So up next, an in-depth look at the most recent rulings from the Supreme Court. Rick Mullaney comes into the studio next on This Week in Jacksonville.
You're watching This Week in Jacksonville on Channel 4.
As you know, Rick Mullaney is our News for Jax political analyst. He's a longtime attorney and he's the founder of the Jacksonville University Public Policy Institute. And Rick, I just got to say, I've learned a lot from you about Supreme Court matters, and especially this week we've been talking about it. Really big impact, it seems like, from the highest court in the land. So let's start here. The ruling last Monday about presidential immunity. Where do we go from here?
Kent, enormous case, landmark case, nothing really like it. I think there's been a bit of an overreaction to the case, and so I think it's important to break it down. Basically, what happened in this case, of course, is that Donald Trump was hoping to get his case dismissed on an immunity.
And this case actually is Donald Trump versus USA, right?
It is, absolutely. The one brought by Jack Smith, and he was hoping to get it dismissed based on immunity. That did not happen. Jack Smith, of course, was hoping to have a trial before November and have that immunity dismissed, and that didn't happen either. What the court did do is this. They created a framework, not only for this case, but for the future. And I think they had an eye towards the future with regards to presidential immunity. And in one bucket, they said, for unofficial acts, the president is not immune. He can be prosecuted for unofficial acts. There's a second bucket of official acts that fall within his core constitutional authority. And for that, he is absolutely immune. If President Obama were to order the assassination of Osama bin Laden, he is absolutely immune. If Donald Trump orders the assassination of Soleimani, he's absolutely immune. If it's in his core constitutional functions, absolute immunity. But there's a third bucket, and this one hasn't really gotten the attention it deserves, and that's official acts, sometimes at the outer perimeter of the official acts, for which the president has presumptive immunity. And the important thing is the word presumptive. That doesn't mean conclusive. In this country, for example, there's a presumption of innocence in every criminal trial, but it's not conclusive. The evidence can overcome it. And so the president can still be prosecuted for some official acts if there's presumptive immunity and it's rebuttable and that evidence overcomes that immunity. That's the general framework that they created.
This is something where we saw immediately after the ruling from the Supreme Court on Monday, Mr. Trump's attorneys in the New York case, where he's got those multiple felony convictions, said, great, now we're going to try and get those convictions thrown out. What's the basis of that?
Well, I'm not surprised, but there's 4 pending cases. And in that particular case, the New York case, remember this, much of that conduct was before he was president. So therefore, it wouldn't fall within this case. But the argument of the Trump lawyers is that a number of things happened in 2018 in which he was president. Some social media posts, an ethics disclosure form, some conversations with his staff, including Hope Hicks. He said that was brought into evidence. The prosecution explicitly argued that the Hope Hicks testimony was devastating. They argued that the forms were devastating, and they therefore want a new trial, saying that under this immunity case, that cannot be presented at trial, and it should result in a new trial. I think that's unlikely, by the way. Even if it was a mistake, I think the court may find it to be harmless error. There was a lot of other evidence presented. We're going to have to wait and see. There's a hearing set for that.
Yeah, and the judge did almost immediately respond and say, okay, we're going to postpone the sentencing, which was to come up July 11th, and move that to September, and a date in September where he said, I'll rule on whether or not the case should be set aside. And if it's not, then we'll move to sentencing on September 18th.
He did the right thing. You got to hear the arguments. I don't think the Trump lawyers are likely to succeed on that, but you have to hear the arguments. Remember, too, by the way, there'll be other proceedings before the trial court in the Jack Smith case, because in the Supreme Court case, the U.S. versus Trump, that has been now remanded to the district court, and they're going to have hearings and findings there, too. So all these 4 cases are going to be impacted by what the Supreme Court did last Monday.
So as we talked about it during the week, does this create an advantage or is this positive news for the Trump campaign as he's running for re-election?
Let me give you the short answer to that. Yes.
Yeah, when you preface it like that, I think, okay, there are going to be 3 letters.
You know, a lot of times in the debates, they don't answer the question. I'll answer the question. Yes. This is an advantage for Donald Trump. The main reason it's an advantage for Donald Trump is because based on this ruling, it's virtually impossible to have this trial before November. It's been remanded to the district court. They're going to have to go through the allegations of the indictment and determine which are official acts and which are unofficial acts. For those official acts, they're going to have to determine whether it's absolute immunity or presumptive immunity. And if there's presumptive immunity, they're going to have to determine whether it's rebuttable and the evidence overcomes it. So you're going to have a big, probably evidentiary hearing and findings by the trial court. And at the end of that, Kent, you can take an interlocutory appeal. That means an appeal to the Supreme Court and appeal it before the trial once again. So the odds of this happening, the trial before November, are slim. So that's advantage Donald Trump. The other piece of this is based on this ruling. The scope of what Jack Smith can now present has been limited based on this ruling. Part of his evidence has now been knocked out. His case, however, is alive and well. It can still go forward, but it'll take a little bit of a different shape, a little bit of a different form. So if the question is, did this help Donald Trump? Yes, it did.
You know, and we got about 2 minutes left in our show here, but it sounds like some people are confused about this. Hey, well, does that impact just federal cases? What about just Georgia? That's a state case. Does it impact all of those because he's the president of all the states?
Well, we'll separate into two. There's 4 cases. 2 of them involve the president's conduct while president. The D.C. case with Jack Smith, but also the Georgia case. That may be being brought in Georgia, but it's about the federal election, and he was president at the time. And so potentially big impact in Georgia. That case is now up on appeal based on the conduct of the prosecutor there. However, there's going to have to be an evidentiary hearing, could have a big impact in Georgia. 2 other cases, however, the one in Florida and the New York case, the President Trump wasn't really president at quite a bit of the factual times when they're doing the prosecution for them. For example, in the classified documents case, much of that involves allegations after he left the presidency, responding to the subpoena, obstruction of records, obstruction of justice. Much of that is post-presidency. However, Kent, it will go back to that court. They're going to have to make findings in light of the Supreme Court opinion. It affects all 4 cases. But 2 of those cases involve when he was president of the United States, and 2 of those cases are really when he wasn't president.
Yeah. Rick, I appreciate it very much. And like I said, I learn a lot about Supreme Court and the workings of our judicial system by talking with you. Thank you.
Thank you, Ken.
So Mayor Donna Deegan returns next week as we discuss the end of her first full year in office. A lot happened in the city of Jacksonville during that time, right? This Week in Jacksonville airs each Sunday morning at this time. I'm Kent Justice. Thanks for watching on air on Channel 4 and the CW17, and you find us online, newsforjax.com, and then streaming on News4Jax Plus. And don't forget to check out our podcast, This Week in Jacksonville Business Edition. This week's episode focusing on new information from the Florida Chamber of Commerce, signaling a huge population boom in Duval County over the next 5 years.
See why every day more people are choosing News 4 Jax, Northeast Florida and South Georgia's #1 source for local news.